Hello everyone, and welcome to Techstrong TV. Today is Monday, October 3rd, and I hope everyone's October's off to a great start so far. I'm your host, William Willis, and in today's show, we're going to bring you some fantastic interviews with some incredible guests from around the world. So stay tuned. As always, I'm going to start off with a Techstrong news recap, filling you in on the biggest tech headlines that are making waves. We then have 2 episodes of View with Vizard. In the first episode, Mike speaks with Rob Emsley, Head of Data Protection and Cybersecurity Marketing at Dell Technologies, where Rob explains why there needs to be a better balance struck between cybersecurity and resilience. Mike will then interview Roy Ravhon, CEO and co-founder of FinOut, as Roy explains how FinOps will rein in cloud spending that is spun out of control. We then will be airing episode 6 of the SRE show. In this episode, Mitch Ashley is joined by Adriana Villela and Anna Margarita Medina from Lightstep, Vince Wong from Grafana Labs, and Jacob Plick from Fanatics Inc. to define observability from an SRE standpoint, discuss why observability is so important for SREs in particular, and look into some of the observability tools used to create and improve SRE best practices. We're then going to be joined by our very own Cody J. Brown, who will hop on to tell us more about some of the upcoming webinars we have. Next up, we will be airing episode 1 of our series Engineering the Change. This series will follow the 3 winners of the Engineering the Change Scholarship Program as they tackle a 10-week intensive coding bootcamp and prepare themselves for careers in software engineering. Mitch will then sit down with Vladi Sandler, CEO and co-founder of Lightspin, to talk about how Lightspin has launched free access to its cloud-native application production platform. Then, Mitch will talk to Doug McKee, Principal Engineer and Director of Vulnerability Research, as well as Python Vulnerability Research at Trillex, to share research findings into a vulnerability estimated to be present in over 3,500,000 open source projects, as well as being prevalent in closed source projects as well. We then go to Yalla DevOps, where Alan met with Sharon Rubin, Senior Software Engineer at Microsoft, about commercial software engineering and how to handle private data. And to wrap up this broadcast, we go to Open Source Summit, where Alan met with Lee Calcote, founder and CEO of Layer 5, to discuss a few open source service mesh projects the company is currently working on, 2 of which recently landed in the CNCF. That's what we have coming up for you on this episode of Techstrong TV. So without further ado, let's get the show started. Enjoy.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Hi again, everyone. Here are the headlines for October 3rd. First up, the House of Representatives approved an antitrust legislation targeting the dominance of big tech companies. Among the measures within the legislation, it allows states the ability to choose the location of courts where they decide federal antitrust cases, as well as increase the filing fees by companies to federal agencies for proposed mergers worth more than $500 million. These measures hope to avoid the home court advantage big tech companies currently gain from being in Northern California, as well as increase the revenue for federal enforcement efforts. This legislation comes as more and more states have joined with the Justice Department and Federal Trade Commission in lawsuits against big tech companies. While on the subject of big tech, Google has announced plans to expand its cloud services infrastructure to Greece, in a move that is promising to create 20,000 jobs. Google has also announced plans to create a research center for tech sustainability and AI in 2 Greek cities. The total investment is expected to add around 2.2 billion euros to the Greek economy by 2030. This plan follows other big tech companies that have announced investments in Greece, such as Microsoft, Cisco, and Amazon. This comes as Greece has been trying to boost its tech sector, hoping to diversify its economy that is overly reliant on tourism. Next up, Japan has announced that they will be providing Micron Technology, a major U.S. chip maker, with a subsidy of $322 million to build advanced memory chips at a Hiroshima factory. Micron has stated that they will use the subsidy to strengthen production capacity and develop new chips. This plan comes as the US is trying to promote technology cooperation between Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan amidst China's growing influence. Japan itself has set up its own fund to support semiconductor manufacturing, with this being its third deal so far. In other news, Netflix is setting up its own video game studio as it moves to solidify its position in the gaming industry. While Netflix has purchased small gaming studios in the past, it is moving towards creating an in-house studio from the ground up. In April, Netflix announced the loss of 200,000 subscribers, and since then, it has lost an additional million. Netflix has been cozying up to the gaming industry over the past couple of years, with it releasing series based on several hit games. But with opening up its own studio, they can focus on their own IP and grow in a congested streaming market. On DevOps.com, we have an article looking at several of Atlassian's new announcements at their recent business event. Among some of these announcements are the announcement of Smart Links, a directory that tracks projects across separate applications, and a subscription bundle for all of its offerings together. Atlassian has stated that these new features and products are part of their effort to improve the collaboration with DevOps teams. To learn more about how Atlassian aims to improve collaboration in DevOps, go to DevOps.com. On Security Boulevard, we have an article looking at a recently published memo by the White House requiring agencies to comply with guidelines from the Office of Management and Budget. The memo builds on an executive order focused on the security and the integrity of the software supply chain. The memo requires each federal agency to comply with the NIST guidance when using third-party software. To learn more about the details of the memo, as well as a deep dive into the importance of software supply chain security, go to securityboulevard.com. Finally, on Digital CXO, we have an article looking at 5 important areas to focus on when working towards inclusive design. Inclusive design allows for users to meaningfully interact with software, so the more inclusive a design is, the more people that can and that will use it. However, when working towards inclusive design, 5 factors have to be considered: equitable access, regulatory requirements, improving usability, expanding user reach, and reputation. To learn more about each of these 5 factors, go to digitalcxo.com. And that's today's Techstrong News Recap.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and Media Ops CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Rob Emsley, who's Director of Data Protection Solutions for Dell Technologies, and we're talking about the relationship between data protection and cybersecurity these days. And there's a recent controversial report from the folks at Gartner Maverick talking about maybe we're out of balance on the two. Rob, welcome to the show.
Hey, Mike. Lovely to be here. Yeah, it's certainly interesting. I think you've been covering the news daily, weekly, monthly for a long time. That cyber security and cyber attacks seem to be occurring on a daily, hourly basis, and certainly the prevailing wisdom has been, hey, you have to protect yourself from keeping the bad guys out. But as you mentioned, the team over at Gartner, and especially the team that does this Mavericks research, they tend to take the contrary view, that is held by most people, that you can keep the bad guys out of your environment. And really what they say is you need to accept that you will be hacked and you have to embrace the breach.
Mm-hmm. And so that means becoming more resilient, which means finding ways to recover faster from the attack and to limit the attack. What is your sense of how much organizations are actually doing that? I mean, we've been talking about data protection for decades now, and it always seems to be something we don't quite get right. So where are we right now in terms of maturity for the whole process?
Yeah, I think good question. I think that the reality is that all customers have a backup and recovery discipline within their environment. I mean, backup is as old as you and I, Mike. As long as people have been creating data, they've realized that creating a backup of that data is the best way of giving you something that you can use for recovery. One of the things that's changed is that cyber criminals have realized that as well as going after your production data, if they can infiltrate your backup data, then really all of the leverage is on the cyber criminal, because your production data is infected and your backup data is infected, and they hold often the keys to unlock both of those. So one of the things that's really changed is, how do I actually give myself a copy of my environment that really can't be infected by the cyber criminals? And that's really where here at Dell Technologies, we've been very focused at providing a solution within the context of backup and recovery that gives you a truly cyber resilient starting point in order to bring your environment back up and running. And I can go into details about how we do that.
The Gartner report makes it seem, though, that the spending on cybersecurity is coming at the expense of data protection. And in my experience, those two things tend to be separate budgets in organizations. So what is your sense of what is the right balance between these two things, and where should we be focusing our efforts?
Yeah, and I think the word balance is very key there, Mike. I think that what we've seen is that a lot of IT budget dollars is spent in the discipline of prevention and securing the perimeter and securing the elements inside of the perimeter. And I think the point that Gartner is conveying is that that's money well spent, but you need to get a balance between spending money on keeping the bad guys out and also spending money on, if they do get in, and the assumption is that they will get in through, some way, somehow, to give you budget dollars to spend on allowing you to react to that situation. So that's the money on cyber resilience. So prevention is good, but you need to get the balance. And they, in the Mavericks report, hopefully, you can share that link with with your readers. You'll see they actually show a seesaw, to actually get that budget spent balanced.
I read the report and I laughed, so I went back in time and I looked up when was the first time we started talking about the need to converge cybersecurity and data protection, and I got as far back as 2007. So what is it, or what prevents us from achieving that goal? Because here we are, 2 decades later, essentially, and we're still talking about the same issues. So what has been the problem?
Well, I think what's changed is the backup environment, maybe certainly years ago, was very much based around, backup to tape. If you remember, that was the prevailing medium that backup copies were stored on. One of the advantages that tape had, was that it was often disconnected from the network. But even when the medium was disconnected, the backup servers have always been on the network. And the challenge is that network is part of the same attack surface as the production environment. So the credentials and the phishing attacks that take place to socially engineer a way into a customer's IT environment not only gives the bad actors access to production environments, but it also gives the bad actors access to backup environments. And that's really what's changed over the last probably half a decade, is how many situations occur that the backup environment, where, for many years before, people have relied on being available for them to use for recovery are often compromised themselves. And that's where I think it becomes really concerning to many clients is if that's happening, what do I need to do to my backup environment to make it not susceptible to bad actors infiltrating it? And that's where many of our customers, we talk about three important capabilities. We talk about isolation, we talk about immutability, and we talk about intelligence. And the isolation element is really predicated on we work with customers to deliver what we call a cyber vault. And a cyber vault, as the name suggests, is a vault for you to keep a good known copy of your data away from the traditional attack surfaces so that when you need to go to the vault, you have the confidence that what is in the vault is actually going to allow you to bring your business back into production. And the way we do that is that if you think about a vault, normally the vaults that you and I use, whether or not it's in a hotel or whether or not it's a bank vault, the ability to open the vault is actually controlled from outside of the vault, a keypad on the outside, et cetera, et cetera. But a cyber vault that we deliver from our data protection solution, the mechanisms to control it are actually controlled independent of everything that's outside. It's actually controlled from inside the vault itself. So the management of it is controlled and automated, is also isolated from the attack surface. And that is why, over the last few years, we have over 1,000 customers that have invested in the Dell Technologies cyber resiliency technology as a additional solution to their investment in our data protection capabilities.
Mm-hmm. Do you think we need to narrow the time between when the ransomware attack is detected and we start backing up the latest version of our data? Because it seems like the game is really just to protect as much data as we can, as quickly as we can, and then limit the damage, because it doesn't seem like we're able to eliminate the threat altogether.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, one of the things you're tending to see is quite often the concept of creating a backup copy is a daily activity. But with storage and backup technologies now, the ability to create more frequent copies of your data is much more readily available, either through more frequent backups or the use of snapshot technology within the storage ecosystems, because a lot of what we're talking about with regards to vaulting data and keeping good copies of data away from the traditional attack surfaces, are things that are not only available within the context of data protection and backup and recovery, but also Dell Technologies storage systems, whether or not it be high-end primary storage solutions or unstructured storage solutions for file and object storage. We have technology within both of those environments that also, gives you the ability to isolate and secure the copies of data on a more frequent basis. And certainly you make a good point is that in today's economy, time is everything. So it isn't just how quickly can you restore, but it's how much exposure to corruption are you able to accept? And the smaller amount of time is driven by more frequent creation of copies within the environment.
Do you think there's a lot more focus these days on recovery time objectives because time is money, and the longer that things are not recovered, the more damage there is to the business? Or are we more focused on that than we have been historically?
No, I think that time, the old adage that time is money is still very, very true, Mike. one of the things that as well as having a good known copy of data, that is kind of the first thing that we advise our customers to do. Many clients are actually investing in what's known as an isolated recovery environment. Because if you think about it, when you get attacked by a cyber criminal, and invariably that attack is something you have to report to the authorities. Within the United States, you would report that invariably to the FBI. You have to realize, and some of our customers, unfortunately, have had to deal with this, your data center that's been infected now becomes a crime scene. And your ability to recover into that environment may not be your choice to perform, because the authorities are investigating a crime. So many customers use the isolation of our cyber vault in order to build a recovery environment that they can stand up the critical applications and the critical systems that they need to run their business as quickly as they possibly can. And they use that in parallel while the authorities are investigating the cybercrime.
We've been telling people about the need for a 3-2-1 approach to data protection for years. Mm-hmm. And we've also kind of seen people nod their head and then nobody ever tested the capability. So are we getting better at the best practices for data protection? Or are people really thinking through the testing to make sure they can get to the data? Because as you and I are well known, many people have invested in backup and recovery only to discover that the data was corrupted for one reason or another. Yeah, no,
you make a very good point. Certainly when it comes to cyber resiliency, it's people, process and technology working together. One of the things that we're very fortunate to be able to do is that a big part of Dell Technologies is our global services organization. So a lot of what we do is very consultative in its nature, as far as it's really working out with customers kind of the processes that they need to follow, not only to create their cyber vault, but also, as you correctly point out, to regularly test their cyber resiliency and their ability to bring the business back online. And a lot of the consulting is to really work with customers to understand, how much of your IT real estate is mission critical, insofar as in order to continue to do what you do as a business, these are the systems and the applications that you need to bring up and you need to have available, and then to really concentrate on those initially as the focus of your cyber resiliency investment. But certainly, testing, recovery is just as important for preparing yourself for disaster recovery and recovery from sort of natural disasters that are things that we in the past were kind of the big area of focus. Protecting yourself from an outage caused by hurricane, flooding, fire, etc. But make no mistake, cyber attacks are probably more prevalent than any form of naturally occurring disaster.
Right. So to bring it full circle, do you think that the cybersecurity people are having more conversations with the data protection people, or are they still operating in isolation from each other? And who's in control of the budget, and how much influence does either party really have?
Yeah, we've definitely seen a change over the years, Mike. Certainly, the data protection team, was very much, part of the IT operations organization. They were offering a service, to the through IT to protect data, and create copies of data for operational recovery, disaster recovery. But over the last several years, many of our discussions are with the Corporate Information Security Office, the CISOs, and one of the things that many customers find is that the budget for cyber resiliency is green lighted much more quickly than regular IT projects. In fact, one of the times where we find that the cyber resilient infrastructure is invested in is on customers that unfortunately have been affected by a cyber crime. One of the best customer stories that we had is one of our United States school districts that were infected by a ransomware attack and had to use whatever mechanisms and processes that they could to bring themselves back into production. And it took them multiple weeks in order to get to a state that they could continue to operate in the way that they needed to. So after that incident, they worked with us and one of our partners to invest in a cyber recovery vault. And then, unfortunately, they were infected again by a ransomware attack. But this time, their ability to restore operations was measured in hours and not weeks. So that was a real opportunity for us to sort of see the before and after. And for them, that was a kind of a game changer that, being out of business and out of production for multiple weeks, means that they can't sort of offer classes to their students. They can't, administer the school district. So being able to do that in a matter of hours is really sort of the night and day. And many investments in cyber resiliency are not driven by the IT director. They're really driven and green-lighted by the office of the security officer.
Do you also think that the board of directors is paying more attention and it's easier to get these projects funded because they're starting to realize that ransomware is such a threat?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we often say that cyber resiliency and cybersecurity in general, is a board level decision. And it's interesting. One of the things that the advice to many boards when they think about hiring CISOs, and one of the things that the Gartner report talks about, and they talk about as an organization, the board should be thinking about, green lighting, how do we become a cyber resilient organization? And one of the things that they say is, hey, one of the best CISOs that you want to hire is not somebody that has never been impacted by a cyber crime, but somebody that has been impacted and has actually had to deal with the repercussions of bringing the business up online. So they actually talk about hiring for failure, which is kind of like sometimes counterintuitive, but it's kind of like the belief is that people that have gone through something, have more understanding of what is needed than people that haven't had to deal with conflict. And that is very very true in this world of cyber resiliency.
All right, no matter what the topic, this School of Hard Knocks is still the best teacher. Hey, Rob, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks a lot, Mike.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Roy Rabhan, who's the CEO for FinOut. We're going to be talking about the cloud and the cost thereof and how to maybe get those cloud costs under control. Roy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Michael, for having me.
what is it that makes controlling cloud spending so difficult? And what are the challenges? Because people get these monthly bills, and you would think that they would just sort through that. But apparently, those bills tend to fluctuate wildly. So, what is the root cause of the problem?
I think the root cause is the complexity of this entire industry, right? So AWS is charging you by the second by thousands of different line items, and just taking the bottom line, you paid $1 million a month for AWS. This but like what that $1 million comprised of? You have so many different services. I think AWS is already on 200 managed services, and each one is priced by, multiple factors, and everything is such a low granularity. So when engineers, finish the month, let alone finance departments, that they look at that, huge millions of line invoice, and they were like, dazzled, like everything can change. Developers can do essentially whatever they want, and it's going to be reflected in the bill at the end of the month, and like just no one understands what's happening.
Is that going to change, you think? Because honestly, developers have been somewhat like drunken sailors, and no one's been checking how much they've been spending on what for a long time now. And it's kind of ingrained in their culture. So how does a finance team kind of come along and say, hey, we want to actually put some controls on this, and to what degree are they going to be able to do that?
I think it's all a matter of quantity, right? So when we started to migrate to the cloud as an industry, we did not think about the implications of, how much money is it going to cost. So we were running servers and everything was okay, for a year, 2, 3, 4. And then the CFO wakes up in the middle of the night and figures out that, cloud cost is the second biggest expense that he had, in the organization after salaries. And it also comes with the realization that he better understands the coffee budget more than the cloud one. And, so it's okay to start, and run fast and just, have the change the entire sense of mind to run as fast as you can, and just spend as much as you want. But at some point, you need to start and be accountable for what you're doing. And if it's just going to cost too much money, so the company is not going to be profitable. And especially, in more difficult times in the market like we're experiencing right now, we start to optimize for profitability. We start to make sure that, we're selling something and our service is something that can be profitable at some point. And the economy of scale should kick in. And if, just engineers keep on doing whatever they want, this is actual real threat on a company business.
Are organizations trying to reduce the total spend, or are they just trying to make it more predictable and understand exactly what their monthly nut's going to look like in a way that they can manage better?
So I don't think that you will find an organization that says that he's okay with its cloud spend. Everyone wants to decrease it to some point, but you need to do both, right? So you need to first decrease what you're having, and you need to make sure that you're growing at the rate that match your business, right? So if your cloud cost is growing in a higher rate than your revenue, then you're not going to a good place, right? Your gross margin is just going to decrease and decrease and decrease, and you don't have a viable business. And you always need to make sure that you can be predictable, that you can, understand or even predict how much money do you gonna spend to get, specific amount of revenue in. And when you understand that formula and you understand, that you're growing at a healthy rate, that way finance and engineering can, live in harmony because they're speaking on the same language and they, tie to the same goal.
How do I do that in a way that I can affect change in a meaningful way? And I'm asking the question because the pace at which these workloads are spun up and down is pretty fast. So how do I get in the middle of that workflow and say, hey, we're going to not run this or optimize this or shift this over to a different tier? How does that work?
So we always want to balance between, engineers that should run as fast as they can and just, innovate and operate their environment without thinking of cost, and still maintain a connection to reality. So their business is matching what they're spending. And for that case, there's the concept of unit economics that was created. So we want to see how much money do we spend on vice versa to the amount of metrics that we were able to operate in our environment. And when we do that, we see, we can predict that our cloud cost is increasing, and that's okay. So cloud cost can increase by 50% month over month, and that's perfectly okay because we were managing, to bring more money into the company, to generate, produce more units. And when we have a unit economic line that is flat, and this means just that we're spending the same amount of money, per resource than what we're used to, that way we can see that we're scaling at a healthy rate, and we can maintain, to run and boot servers and do whatever you want and spawn on Kubernetes clusters and change pods and do whatever, technical mumbo jumbo that we want to do in order to operate the environment, but we're still maintaining a correlation to the business.
Do you think there's more sensitivity to these costs now that we're in something of a global economic downturn, but do you think the finance people are knocking on the door a little more aggressively than they might have in the past?
So 100%. I mean, you just can't leave cloud cost alone in normal days. So when the market is in downturn and the next funding is not around the corner, and we might need to extend our runway and do lots of things. So we can cut down in headcount, and that's an immediate response. But for the long run, we have to make sure that we're scaling down on the second biggest expense after salaries, which is usually cloud cost. And if you look at it in a holistic manner and look at the entire operation that we have as a business, and really understand like what does each dollar comprised of, and where should we allocate it, and we spend dollars to do what, to operate faster on the R&D, to host a customer, to support something, right? So we need to understand that and when companies starts to fear of their runway and want to optimize their margin, and everyone speaks about the path to profitability, it all comes down to how much it's cost us to run that operation as a business.
How smart can all of this get? I mean, ultimately, do you think we'll be throwing algorithms at all this stuff to kind of control the costs, and the algorithms themselves will do the heavy lifting, or is there some other way to think about it?
So it's a very complicated problem, right? So we need to think about it in multiple dimensions and multiple phases. So we first need to have a complete visibility into everything that we operate, and we need to measure. All right. So without measuring, we can't do nothing. And measuring itself is a very difficult problem on its own. And then we need to tie that to our business and make sure that we're measuring the right metrics. Because again, it's okay to pay a lot more money for AWS as long as our business maintains steady. Then we need to find ways on how to optimize that environment. And then we need to repeat that cycle over and over again until forever. Because it's not just a one-time job that I can optimize my AWS spend and walk away. It's a change of mind that an organization is going through that's called FinOps, which essentially wants to get everyone accountable for the cost. And engineers, the same as they were accountable, a few years ago, they started to operate DevOps, right? So to push their code into production and to monitor it while it's there. So no one even thought that developers would ever want to do that. And now we started to see the same trend running with financial, the financial aspect as well. So cloud financial management is a very big thing of the day-to-day operation, and DevOps needs to be accountable for what they're doing, and developers need to be accountable for what they're doing. And only when achieving that, this is where you can really stay in control of your cloud cost. So it's a complete mindset that the company needs to go through in order to achieve that control and visibility.
Who's in charge of this conversation in these organizations? Is it the finance team, or are they just monitoring the total cost, and then they're saying to the DevOps team, "Thou shalt not exceed this number," and you go figure it out? Or just how actively involved are the finance teams?
So it's one of the things that we're trying to figure out as an industry. So the FinOps Foundation have a yearly survey that they're running, and they're constantly asking the question like, who do you report to in which organizational factor? Because finance really wants and care about that information, but they have no technical ability to understand anything from that bill because it's all Chinese to them. But DevOps don't really care about operating the cloud financial management because they measured on SLA, they measured on different things, and those things might contradict. So FinOps sits someone under the CTO, someone under the CIO, someone under the CFO. It really depends on how the companies gets to solve this problem. We still don't see a unified standard in the industry. It's relatively new. It's like when DevOps started, no one really knew if it's under engineering, under operation, like where exactly those departments sits. It's an evolution that we experience now in the market, and we can see that FinOps teams are growing rapidly. So enterprises have FinOps team that exceeding 10 people from time to time, and even an entire cloud cost center of excellence department that is FinOps is one thing that they're doing. So it's a trend that is going on in the world, and like changes our entire philosophy for cloud financial management.
So what's your best advice to folks about how to get started with this? Do I just throw everybody in a room and lock the door and hope for the best? Or is there some, adult way of going about this?
So it really depends on the organizational structure and the culture that they have. So some organization won't do anything without an executive that, force them to do that. Some organization, FinOps is growing from the bottom up because DevOps feel, that they're operating in a non-efficient manner and they really care about it. And the same that they want to have their software to run, the fastest and to be the most reliable ever. They also want to be, the most financial viable. So it really depends on the company and the culture and how well this is structured. But we see organizations that starts to adopt FinOps, and really it depends on the way. But there's still starts to have it. It's really kind of a gamification efforts, right? So engineers starts to look at their metrics and they suddenly see that every line of code has a meaning. And now they're deploying something and they look at the error rates and they also look at the cost and they're working on optimizing that, and start to be a competition between everyone, like who can optimize the cost better and who can be, the organizational hero that took the company out of their troubles because they found something that can just cut the cost by 20%. And it's not something that automatically can happen. It's usually an architectural decision that happened, and while doing that, everyone looks up to them and everyone wants to do the same. So gamification is a huge thing when operating FinOps.
All right, folks, you heard it here. Financial discipline is coming to the cloud one way or another, and it's probably long overdue. Rowie, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Michael, for having me.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the SRE Show. We're so glad that you've joined us for this episode. We've got a really great topic and some fantastic panelists. First, I want to thank our partners at Lightstep, who are just fantastic to work with and helping us put the show together, creating some of the topics and involving people from different companies. So it's sponsored by Lightstep, and it's really looking not just at that one company's perspective, but at multiple. And so you're going to hear that really quickly. So I really appreciate the approach that the folks have taken. And it's great to partner with them, as I mentioned. So our topic today is starting a SRE program, and what's that like? Bringing that up in an organization, whether you're starting from scratch or you're starting from, entering an organization. How do you introduce observability? How do you introduce these different elements? Is the Google model the right model to follow? And kind of where do we go from there? So we have a fantastic group of folks here, and I'm just going to start out and let them introduce themselves. Anna, would you start out first?
Definitely. My name's Ana Margarita Medina. I'm a staff developer advocate at Lightstep. I get to work with customers in the community, teaching them ways that they can be proactive about observability and incident response. Prior to doing this, I worked at Gremlin, focusing on helping companies with chaos engineering, but that also meant we're starting our SRE practice, chaos is the way we're going to start. How do we go about that? And prior to that, I was an SRE at Uber, where I came in and a program was running, and it was really interesting to onboard to things like that. And in my prior life, I was that developer that said it worked on my machine and that's all that matters. And I didn't understand anything in systems. So it was a really nice way to come into Uber and have to learn a lot of stuff. And then getting a chance to share with others what that journey has been like is extremely rewarding. And I'll pass it on over to Vince to introduce themselves.
Thank you. Good to meet everyone. My name is Vince Huang. I currently work at K6, which is a subsidiary of Grafana Labs. I am a program manager there, and prior to that, I worked at Gremlin with Anna and Jacob. You'll soon learn. But a lot of my history revolves around incident and problem management, and watching things burn really effectively is how things evolved. So yeah, happy to share some of those stories as we go along.
Excellent. Adriana.
Hey, I'm Adriana Villela. I am a senior developer advocate at Lightstep. I'm actually pretty fresh to the developer advocate role. Before that, I was managing an observability and platform team at Two Cows. And I've done a bunch of work in the DevOps space, especially getting people excited about DevOps. I worked for a large financial institution in Canada where we spent a significant amount of time just educating folks on DevOps practices and why you should do it, why it matters, and all that. And then before that, I spent a good 16 years of my career as a software engineer doing Java development. So my career has taken various different turns, and it's been all awesome.
Great. Now, last but certainly not least, Jacob.
Hey everybody, my name is Jacob Plick, and I'm a staff software engineer at Fanatics Betting and Gaming. I'm spending a lot of time building a sportsbook gaming and betting platform from the ground up. And a lot of that is going to be spending a lot of time building out incident management practices, our SRE methodologies, spending a lot of time with developer education and experience and stuff like that. It's actually week 4 of that, which is really cool. Spent a lot of time building, actually, it's kind of a little deja vu because I was part of the founding SRE team at Fanatics. It's Fanatics Holdco now, because it's like 4 different companies now, which is pretty wild. So it's kind of a boomerang, but not a boomerang. And I spent a lot of time at Gremlin building out chaos engineering practices and a lot of SRE stuff there, and at Grafana Labs working on observability and onboarding for that. So yeah, excited to chat.
Excellent. Well, I'd love to get some perspective on kind of where you all have started your journeys in becoming SREs yourself, but also helping introduce that into organizations that you've been part of. And you've probably done that both as in your role as a product company, but also, I'm guessing, in your own internal, operations and implementation of that. So who wants to take sort of a first shot? And then we're going to dive into let's talk about observability and incident response and all of those things and how they fit into that. And our goal is just to share our experiences to hopefully help others and also learn from each other too. So who wants to start off the topic?
I'll take a first stab because it's something I'm thinking about right now as I'm literally building it from 0 to 1, literally right now. And so there's definitely been moments of deja vu a little bit. I like to say that I'm part of the old guard of tech where we had to physically pick up a phone and call someone. There wasn't a alert management platform or any sort of incident response platform that would tie into your observability to wake somebody up. So sometimes that involved calling the wrong number at 4 a.m. So that, because I'm human. But what's wild about that is it created that sort of empathetic mindset for me almost automatically. Even just by like, I don't want to call the wrong person, and but also tied into making sure that we had the right playbooks in order to like make sure that I have all the information that I need for this incident, and hopefully actually resolve it myself. And at the time, it was sort of this is back in 2015, 2016, where it was super popular to take a bunch of engineers and ta-da, you're all SREs now. Congratulations, you did it. And even though like typically SREs are defined by, software engineers that are sort of in charge of the reliability of X, Y, and Z. But in many cases, we were just, in this case, we were just a bunch of folks that were desktop support engineers that got brought onto, server infrastructure, and then sort of, here you go. And so we learned a lot and grew a lot by being lost in the sauce and then kind of figuring it out as we go. That's kind of how things started for me.
I've got a slightly different perspective. So I've never actually worked per se as an SRE. I feel like I've done SRE adjacent stuff. So like I worked at a large financial institution for about 11 years of my career. And during this time, I've seen my fair share of like really bad things happen and really bad practices. So for me, like always found the missing piece of my career was like this marrying of like development work and operations work. And then like, when DevOps became a thing and then like SRE practices became popular, I'm like, oh, this is the thing that I've always thought was like the cool thing that should be done. Like I've always, I was just chatting with our team on Slack last night where I was saying like, there were always people who at the bank were like monitoring emails in the middle of the night, waiting for incidents to happen just so that they could like swoop in and restart whatever server was hanging, and they'd be kicking it on the overtime pay. So like there was honestly no incentive to do better because it's like, oh, I'm making so much money in overtime, just like restarting services. And I like, there was a rumor that a lot of these guys had like their fancy cars funded because of that. So from seeing all these like horrible things happen, I'm like, okay, there's got to be a better way. And, I'm not one to say that I subscribe necessarily to the Google SRE way of doing things, but I have to say that the Google SRE Bible has been a good guidance on like, hey, these are some things that you should be doing as guiding principles. So like when, like my role before joining Lightstep, I actually managed a platform team and we had SREs on the team, and we were trying to, elevate the SRE practice because I think there were more SREs by name and not necessarily by practice. So we really tried to emphasize like having a call rotation, but like when you were on call, you didn't work on like project work, you were doing things to improve the reliability of the system work, and trying to encourage teams to do like releases during the day and not necessarily have to do like release windows. So these were the kinds of things that I tried to instill on the team to help kind of achieve that SRE maturity that wasn't there at the time.
I'm definitely with you guys on the empathy bit, where I think that in order to have like an SRE mindset, like there's a little bit of empathy to have been on call, to have made that 4 a.m. phone call. Even now, like when I try to set up meetings with other people and they're on the other side of the world, I feel really bad to like not impose on their time schedule, right? And like have to talk with them outside of their window where they're supposed to be working, right? So I like it. It's like on-call PTSD effectively, where like I just don't want to talk with them outside of their times.
Yeah, and I feel like that's a really stressful thing. Like in various roles that I've had, like I've gotten called in the middle of the nights a couple of times, and I don't know. I feel like some jobs, like they overwork you so much that like getting called in the middle of the night, even though you know that you're on call, like it's still, you have like a visceral reaction to that, right? And so like I feel like on-call PTSD, very real, very much needs to be addressed, but not enough companies are addressing it.
Most definitely. I was one of those organizations, like being an Uber and SRE was interesting. Like I was on I was on call for a chaos engineering service that some other folks had built prior to me joining, and a lot of that kept breaking, and I kept getting paged, and there was no one else I could escalate to, and I was still very junior, like learning a lot and like trying to triage these big things, and it was really interesting to watch, and definitely kind of like a really rough way to start on call in general, like throwing into just the well with no practice, but also in a toxic environment. And then a lot of my colleagues, like seeing them like go through terrible trenches and like their SRE, like just life at the company, and like the way that they had to deal with their PTSD throughout these years. I hear of a lot of my friends still kind of like refusing to be in SRE circles because of that, or like they want to do ops work and SRE work, but they feel constrained to software engineering because it's like, I've already been burned. I've already watched everything burn. Like my mental health suffered. I don't want to get there again. And I think sometimes like we don't talk about that enough. Like we don't talk about like this really hurt a person and you can't get that back. Like you lost that time, but you've also changed a lot as a person. And then like, how do you make it better? Like one, how do you like recover from that? Like, can you recover from that? Like, how do you start realizing that there's going to be workplaces that could treat you better? Like teammates that are not going to like, are going to be able to trade shifts with you and like not have these, like everything is already set in stone. We can't make any changes. To then like having the conversations of like, what is a way to do humane on call, or like having like empathy within SRE, and like that goes like not just necessarily having empathy for the engineers in your company and like the tooling that you're supporting as a platform, but like building that empathy to now be to your users and be like, oh, like we have to really make sure that you have a happy experience when you're using our products.
I think there's almost a Pavlovic response to you're getting that message, a text message or whatever, Slack, whatever it is, saying, oh no, if I pick this up, I know I know what I'm in for, right? Or at least some idea. And that's triggers that PTSD you're talking about.
Just a PagerDuty logo, the sound for some folks. Like I've seen all sorts of things.
Like I literally just got my first one. I'm actually like procuring it right now. And I was setting up our first like on-call schedule. And I was just like, well, here goes. I got to put my phone number in. Like, and then like, I got to test it. And I was like, I have not heard that voice in 4 years. Like I had like this, like really like chill down my spine, like, whoa. But I'm also at the same time, I'm also like really excited because like I get to sort of learn from all of my previous experience, learn from a lot of folks that I've talked to, communities that I've helped build over the years, and fingers crossed, build it right,
I think one of the things that really helps though with that is having like the backing of, your bosses to be able to like build the practice the way you want it. Right. Cause I mean, I've been in companies where they're like, oh yeah, we want to do the right thing. And then when push comes to shove, they're like, no, we need to have maintenance windows. And you're like, come on.
Those are both really good points, because it is about that evolution of getting out of firefighting mode, right? We've lived in that world for much too long. And of course, that still happens. But how do you make that evolution into, where you're doing what we would, textbook wise, think of more traditional SRE work, where you're using observability tools, you're doing performance testing, you're doing kind of improvement of reliability, not just stamping out the latest, text or PagerDuty message we got. How do you make that shift?
I think it needs to be baked into the culture of, at the very least, the team that's responsible for this, and certainly at least the leader that's above this. Like something that I talked a lot about even before joining Fanatics Betting and Gaming is like, even before like even like the interview process was like, I'm not going to go through what I went through again. So what are we going to do to make sure that that doesn't happen? And it was really clear that like we're going to actually spend time like creating metrics around average incident load per person, which I've never worked at a place that has done that before. it was always just like, to Adriana, to your point, like, you're right, you're on call, so you're not working on, project stuff. So, okay, great. Like, I don't have stuff in Jira, but like, I'm still doing stuff. Right. And how are we tracking that? And then how does that tie into where things like burnout begin to sort of happen? And so trying to find those qualitative sort of feelings of that before people get burnt out, or proactively being like, hey, you know what? You got woken up at 4 a.m. Tomorrow's you're off. Like it's not even like a thing. See you later.
Yeah, I think that's like such an important thing to have, like to have quantitative evidence of like, hey, this person is getting called way too much. And like, Anna and I were talking to Nora Jones at Jelly a couple of weeks back, and she was talking about the fact that, person X might not be on the on-call rotation, but if they keep getting pulled into incidents, well, that's got to be measured, right? Because that also contributes to burnout.
It was a really interesting conversation, because it was like, there's things that happen in incidents that you can't necessarily just look at. Like, we don't really have logs of like, oh, these are all the systems talking to one another. But like, if Vanessa was the only person that like knows that system on SQL, and like the only like single point of failure, and like your manager is like not really aware that every time you're getting that alert, like you're having to go through her to either push a review or even just like verify that you're running the right query after. It was interesting, because it's like all these little parts of a system that we don't really get to see. And those conversations don't happen enough. And it's really nice to start seeing like, how do we change the incident response platforms that folks are using in a way that we bring in more numbers to it, quantitative, that matters to the business, like whatever that means for folks, like from just SLOs to like, this person is dealing with 5 incidents every single month. Like, how much of a load is that? And like, these are the 7 ones, these are the 7 zeros. And even like, you might have way too many alerts, like those kind of questions that you could be having that are like, as the way that we have seen reliability work throughout the last few years, like we've learned a lot, and like we don't necessarily always make the system changes. So I think we're going to start seeing that a lot more.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced the things won't change until something really breaks.
Or once a leader leaves, like I think like Jacob nailed it in the head, is like it comes from leadership, like from doing a lot of the work in reliability and diversity, inclusion, and equity. I'm like, if a leader is not bought into how expensive it is when things go wrong, whether it's I'm in the front page because people can't access my bank, to I'm currently getting sued because I've treated all my Black employees wrong. Like, until those things happen, a lot of companies are not like, oh, we actually need to invest in this. And then that actually brings that conversation, like, how do you go about investing in it? I think for a lot of the folks in the room, as we were prepping for this call, we kind of mentioned like, there's still this notion of like, you can just buy a tool and like things happen. And it's like, oh no, like that's not that easy. You actually have to do the work and show up.
I think one of the things around SRE is sort of the engineering part of the title. At least it is a discipline that you're bringing. It isn't a tool. It isn't just responding to things. It's how do we add that into what we do, in an operational kind of role, whether you're coming at it from dev or ops or whatever. I'm curious. I can't remember who somebody mentioned about. I think it was you, Anna, that was talking about having the data, the information available, observability tools, things like that. And of course, it's a big topic today is observability. And why is that different than sort of the platforms and alerting, alarming things that we've had in the past? And why is that important going forward? And how do we make sure we're understanding how to leverage that, I guess, is where I'm going. Maybe Anna, if you want to start with that.
Yeah, I can definitely start it where it's like we can have a quick answer with the system metric that like that is alerts a lot, where it's like this is a threshold has been met in memory and CPU and load. And what does that necessarily mean? Like your system has gone there, but how long has it been? Is this a service that is currently being like serving traffic? Is this even part of a critical path for our application? Like we don't necessarily have that. And that's when a lot of like better practices in this space start coming in, where it's like, okay, let's actually make sure we have tagging on our alerts so that we know what services they are. And then you can nail down of like, okay, maybe we actually don't need to track all these metrics for all these services. And then you start kind of looking like, okay, what actually happens when you start looking under the hood? You might uncover things like observability, where you now start looking more like traces and you still get access to metrics and logs and events. And that now allows for you to see like, oh, like we're actually getting this alert for high 500 errors, but we're actually able to see that is because customers A plus B are actually having a huge traffic event. And like, that's why things are going wrong. So now that we get to have all this data that provides like more context into why we're even getting alerted, we're able to see it. But sometimes it comes into that. You had to come from a bad practice of like everything is on fire, like Vince said, like you watch everything burn and you're like, this is not okay. And you're able to see that like the technology space has evolved a lot, and we have tools that now are like more descriptive and allow you to be more precise. And that brings us to like, oh, we're not necessarily just being reactive, we're actually being proactive, because we get to uncover like, oh, if we actually make sure that we are having some auto-scaling policies when customers with this amount of services using our platform, if that automatically scales up when we start seeing this increase, start getting to 60, 70, like you might not even be getting those alerts. So like you're just understanding your systems more is what it comes to it.
Yeah, it helps you understand a little bit before the alerting phase of things, right? Like even as you mentioned, like this is, oh, we're getting a bunch of these 500s, but then you like one of the benefits of some of the observability practices is having some of that back historical data, right? Like if I have these 400s and they've been occurring every week at 4 a.m., it's not going to be as much of an issue as, you know, if all of a sudden they're occurring at 2 in the afternoon, right? Just in comparison, right? So having some of that historical data helps kind of expose, you know, where you need to shine the spotlight in terms of some of your practices.
I would also say, like, you know, if you were to sum up like why observability is great for SREs, I feel like observability gives SRE superpowers. I mean, all of a sudden now you have insight into what's going on in your system. What? And, you know, if you're doing it properly, like if your system is properly observable, you have all the information you need to be able to debug your system, which means that you don't have to rely on, you know, Jenny and Johnny, who are always getting called because they've got domain knowledge. Now your junior person can come in and troubleshoot, and they might not be able to do it as quickly, but they'll still be able to do it in a reasonable amount of time. And as a result, like the cascade effect is then observability gives you psychological safety. So now we're starting to reduce that on-call PTSD.
I also think, to kind of zoom out a little bit, like I started to think about observability as the story of our systems and our people, both like internally and our how it impacts external customers if you have them, because we're going away from a lot of the conversation being, I need this fourth monitor because my fourth monitor is just the dashboards I look at literally for like 6 hours out of the 8 hours that I work. And that's sort of that intermediary that's sort of tied into the alerting mechanisms, which ironically led to the alert fatigue that we're fighting and has created this like incident management, like pardon the term, evolution of these new pieces of tooling and sort of where like things like tracing kind of started from as well, because we're still unpacking these little bitty pieces of like Anna kind of mentioned, sort of tribal knowledge and single points of failure, because it's not just systems folks, it's people too. And how, because, and this is, it's both somehow still really difficult, which is like kind of okay, because like as engineers, we don't want to be bored. So we still want to tackle difficult problems. But from an onboarding story perspective, it's also easier than ever. So it's been pretty wild to see it grow.
I was going to add on with that observability, allowing junior folks to like help and dig into when things are going wrong. I think observability also uncovers like another factor into it, where I know of some organizations doing this, where it's like not necessarily having all the engineers be able to like SSH into boxes to put up logs. And a lot of this is great because it's like you're not allowing them to just run random scripts on there, and like who's verifying those. Like they're not going through like all the channels of like proactive reliability and quality control. So like by having observability, it's like those folks actually don't need to go in there to grab those logs, because the tool was able to like have all of this for you. And that also just allows you to move a lot quicker. Sometimes like you might feel like you've been at that company for 2 or 3 years and you know what you're doing, but you're still going to have a little bit of that fear. And that like comes into that psychological safety piece.
Is there an element of, Vince, is there an element of you feeling more equipped, because it isn't just, here's a bunch of data and here's a bunch of alerts and I got to go figure out what the heck all this means and figure out how to tie it all together. But if you've got some technology that also helps you put it together and get answers a little more easily, that's got to help with at least some of the trauma that we talked about earlier. In part, and I would think why that would be an attractive part of thinking about observability as one of the tool sets for SREs.
I think from like working, like touching like open source technologies and using like vendor toolings in the observability space, like you get that where it's like, I'm not having to do command F and like find my service, find this crash loop back off, and then like try to start going back down. It's like, oh, I can actually see it all. And some of the tools would allow like color coding, or like just click into this and you get more of a view, and like you start like being a detective. And by being a detective, you're just kind of like pressing buttons and you start finding that context yourself, and the tool kind of guides you through it, versus in prior days where you're kind of like having to run through papers and you like highlight and like search for it and then like put this entire map together. Like this map kind of starts being shown to you digitally in a way, and that leads to those incidents being closed a lot quicker. Like,
and I think this, it's a good segue into like talking also about like, the tooling is important, obviously, because it's what enables us to do the things, but having like the proper practices in place also enables you to do observability properly. Because, I was at an organization where all they did was like throw logs at a tool. Well, guess what? You're still running into the same problem, because you're still having to sift through logs that are like disjointed and you don't have the context, right? So observability, like when you start thinking about observability as like a trace first mentality, where the trace gives you that end-to-end view of your system, then yes, those log messages start to make sense because they're baked into the trace, and that becomes like the breadcrumb into like things that are happening into your system that give you that insight so you can troubleshoot. So I think part of the challenge with modern observability practices is now getting out of that, traditional, like, let's look at logs and throw them into an observability tool. And let's actually look at traces with that contextual information. Let's not rely so much on the wall of dashboards, because I'm sorry, that's like super useless. Nobody's got time to sit at a dashboard for like most of their work day. That's where, like SLO based alerts come into play, because then it's based on, you determine your SLOs based on your, I guess it's like a feedback loop based on your observations of the system, and you keep tweaking those SLOs as you go. So it's not like, set in stone, but those kinds of things can help guide like what alerts become meaningful, so that when you get that pop-up, you're not like, oh my God, I'm going to like, your heart starts palpitating and you're like, why am I doing this as a job? I hate my life. Right.
I feel like a lot of the topics or even the directions like that observability and even SRE as a whole is an evolution, right? And I think Jacob used this word also, right? Like it's not something that a manager, regardless of his or her intentions, is like, it's not something you can just drop in, right? There's a learning curve to everything, right? And not necessarily just the practice, and even just the tooling that we have, right? Adriana is kind of mentioning that where it's not just throw all my logs into this tool and magic happens and everybody wins, right? You need to make sense and be able to connect the dots from all of this. So like as we go through and discuss some of these things, I imagine like these are easy to implement when you're a bigger and more mature company, but like when you're a smaller company and you have like 5 employees, it's not really something that's feasible to like drop in a whole SRE practice in the thing, right? So a lot of the learnings that come out are going to be evolutionary. They're going to be something that as you learn or as something catches on fire, you're going to learn from that and be able to adapt to that as you move on.
I totally agree. And I think as long as you come in with I'm going to learn from my mistakes and are willing to adapt, like that's awesome. The problem you get into is when you're in these companies and they're like, okay, we're a small company. We just got to get this product out the door. Screw the good practices. Fine, whatever. Like sometimes you got to cut corners, but then when there's like no plan in place to like go right those wrongs, then I think that's where companies can really get into trouble.
Yeah, I think this is sort of where I always I plant my flag where I state pretty emphatically that incidents aren't bad. They are really great places in which to learn. I argue that if you don't have any incidents, it means you do and you don't know, and that's bad because your customers do know. So that's where you should be spending your time. Just saying.
Well, to that point, one of the talks I've given quite a few times is, we know the failure, the quote, failure is not an option. Actually, failure is required.
Yeah.
Failures to improve things, right?
100%.
People dying in space, that's not an option, but failure is required. So, what it reminds me of is you can't bring the old way of thinking to the new job yes, you bring your experiences of all that, but observability isn't a better grep tool, right? I remember the days of like grepping different logs and piping into this file and then trying to figure out my own analytics. I called that tracing. It was not tracing.
Yeah.
See, that's not it, right? We have to rethink. How do we have to rethink the problem so that we approach it differently and leverage the technology to help us more than if we brought our old kind of mindset to it?
I think this is where it's you hear this a lot around. Like we talked a little bit about being proactive earlier, and it sort of ties into practicing your incident management process, game days, things like this. Something that's really interesting is this is something that I was really passionate about when both my entire time at Gremlin before that, after that. But it's actually a regulatory requirement for us, which I think is really interesting. Whereas like Anna, Vince, and I were just like, please do this proactively, company X, like you will help yourself, I promise. And so that's, all that to say it's not necessarily getting in a room necessarily, of course, with, we're still in a pandemic of sorts. But just being able to say and be able to ask a question and getting it answered is so valuable. Especially if one person has an assumption about how a system works and another person has an assumption about how a system works. And then the actual reality is different. It's actually option C.
That part of like being proactive about your reliability, I think is part of that shift within SRE. And like, I think SRE Bible does kind of teach you some of that, but I think a lot of folks like need that as an action item of like, you kind of need to look into failure in order to make sure that you're setting things right. Like you have to be in an uncomfortable place. Your systems kind of need to get there in order to make sure that when they naturally get there, they're ready to withstand such failures. And I think it's great to be able to do that, where it's like, let's actually make sure that we, one, are embracing failure. This is also a great way to see like how that culture of like of blameless is, and making sure that you're kind of setting up your team to rely on one another, to not necessarily point their fingers of like, Bobby rolled out this YAML file and it broke these 5 services. He has to go fix them. And it's like, that did happen, but why are our systems set up that this can gradually roll out to 5 services at one, and not doing one at a time? And we kind of like gradually see this and accept those changes. Like just having those discussions are going to be really worthwhile for any organization that is looking into SRE or practicing SRE. I think from like the work that I've been doing is like, you can be an organization that's been doing SRE for a while, and you run like something like a game day, and you realize like, oh, we could actually be doing things a lot better. We uncover something really small, such as like outdated links and scripts and runbooks, and this a smaller company that maybe just has 2 SREs runs a game day, and they still have similar learnings. And it's like, it's just about being proactive and doing the work, like showing up and being like, we're going to be thinking about failure and how do we care about our customers more.
Yeah, I think that embracing failure, giving a safe place to fail, I think is so key. And I think, again, gives that psychological safety, right? In order for that to be possible, you need to have that open-mindedness as well. And not just the folks doing the work, like the individual contributors, but leadership needs to have that open-mindedness towards embracing failure and not turning it into this 4-letter word and, attack the issue, not the person. Like, who cares who caused the problem to happen? The fact that it happened means that there's a gap in the workflow. Opportunity to address this issue. Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, I had leadership that definitely instilled that in me early, is that it's okay to fail. The other thing that he also instilled in me is it's not okay to fail more than once the same way, right? And so like we want to be able to experience it and then pick up the learnings and then as best as we can mitigate it so it doesn't happen.
That's speaking of failures, the topic of incident response has come up a lot, right? And talk about observability as well, and incorporating that kind of a mindset. By the way, managers out there, if you're listening, if you really want to shock your team, send your team out at the beginning of the day, say, okay, I want you to go out there and fail. they'll look at you like,
go team.
What happened? They've just got COVID fog. What's the matter with that? So when it comes to incident response, it isn't just the response, right? It's also, okay, you learn, you go through the process and resolve the issue, and you're also collecting knowledge, information, data, right? And then you got to do something, right? How do you incorporate that learning behavior into the process?
So I'll kind of start with the postmortem for me, at least when I start working with folks, is it starts with a timeline, right? Understanding what breaks, when it breaks, and how it breaks, and how long it takes for someone to start to try to address it, right? Whether it's automated or whether it's like an actual person doing something, right? So starting with the timeline and then understanding what those time gaps are, and like that's your baseline of what your average incident might be and how long it might take and how dramatic it might be, right? And then starting to analyze and break it apart. If there's a 15-minute gap in your timeline, either someone didn't write something down and like we need to try to address that a little bit better, or there was just some idleness or something else that could be addressed. Like how can we cut? And our best practice was how can we cut this in half, right? It doesn't have to be cut in half, but that's our starting point. That's our goal. Right. And so it's an open-ended question. It's something that the team as a whole can start to address and come up with ideas. Right. And what works best for the team is going to be what works best. Right. There's no definitive way of this is how it's always going to be. And this is how we can always cut our times in half to the point where, it's immeasurable. It's never going to happen. Right. But at least we have this discussion. At least we start thinking and brainstorming ideas that of what can happen after an incident so that it doesn't happen again.
I think like doing that like really nails it. And then like also adding questions like how and why. Like, how is it that this rolled out? How is it that this got pushed? How is it that this system talks to one another? And then even like asking like those why questions for more context. Like, why is this built this way? Why did you go look into that service? Like, what tribal knowledge that you have? Like, because it's that we all come from so many different spaces where it's like, oh, I've been working with Redis for the last 5 years, so I'm aware of like this really interesting nuances. Or I've been at this organization for 10 years and I've built half of this system, or I've touched half of the system, and like now I bring in perspective that like folks that have been here last time do. So it becomes like this opportunity of like, this costs the company a lot of money. Like, let's make sure we document a lot of it, but that we're able to learn as much as we can. And then like take those learnings and like go be proactive about your reliability.
Excellent. Anybody else have a kind of last comment on that topic? We're running out of time, getting close to the end here. Anybody else want to jump in?
I'll just make a general comment, which is I think in order for any of this to be successful, I think people have to be curious and open-minded at the end of the day, right? Because without that, how can we evolve our practices, right?
I think this kind of brings it back to Anna's point around SLOs, because I found that in a lot of my previous experience, a lot of the incidents that, whether to be honest, many cases there were no postmortems or any sort of analysis or conversation. It's not broken and everything's not on fire, and that was really the end of it, right? When the reality was like, then it would break again or break in a different way, right? And so we're missing the story that got us from point A to point B. And a lot of it is a lot of really effective SLOs also have business-minded logic behind them as well. And like, for example, some of the things that we're doing is not just like incident reviews with like the business level or business like VP level folks, and not just like, this is why it won't happen again, sorry. It's more of this is also like tied into deadlines, and should we maybe pull back on a feature because we're busy fighting fires? That's where we have error budgets for. And that's how those conversations become. Because typically when you're talking about reliability to someone that's a VP of finance, they're only thinking about the bottom line number, when the reality is that bottom line number can be affected by the decision that you make in this meeting. Absolutely. We're going to have to let you have the last comment there, Jacob. So congratulations. You win the game. We gamified it. Great. Well, thank you to all. You're a great panel. I can't wait to get you back together again. Jacob, Vince, Adriana, Anna, fantastic. And it's both you and all your wealth of experiences and knowledge are just fantastic to share. So I hope our audience will join us again for the next episode of the SRE Show. As you can tell, we're getting into a lot of really good stuff here, and it's all real and it's all practical. So I hope that you've taken away some really good things from this, and thanks my panel with me for joining us today. We'll see you again soon.
Looking for a live conference focused on the tools, technologies, and practices most important to your business? Innotech conferences are live one-day business and technology conferences highlighting the latest in trends for IT leaders, developers, and IT professionals. Each event combines education, innovation, peer-to-peer networking, and the latest technology and business solutions for a diverse IT-focused audience. Innotech conferences occur throughout the year in strategic regional locations, bringing together technology professionals from various industries to learn about the solutions, practices, and tools impacting their day-to-day work and gain insight into what's to come. Presenters at Innotech conferences are selected and curated to ensure each session provides the most up-to-date and relevant information without any hype. Whether you're interested in digital transformation, cybersecurity, cloud, IT leadership, or DevOps, Innotech conferences deliver. 2022 events are scheduled to be held in Austin, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, and Washington, D.C. Inotech conferences are produced by Techstrong Live and powered by Techstrong Group.
Hey everyone, happy Monday. Cody J. Brown here with some upcoming programs from Techstrong Learning. So first up tomorrow, October 4th at 1 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com, Redis presents Overcoming the Challenges of Deploying a Microservices Data Layer on Kubernetes. This learning experience aims to help navigate the trade-offs and complexities of deploying at scale. Our panel has also put together a demo of a microservice deployment using Redis Enterprise Operator for Kubernetes on Red Hat OpenShift. The following day, Wednesday, October 5th at 1 p.m. Eastern, Techstrong Research and Nirmata have teamed up for a Pulse Meter survey report on top Kubernetes security concerns and how to address them. The panel will dive into the issues security teams face and the best practices to overcome top concerns. And we are joined once again by our friends at Fairwinds, who will show you how to keep your cloud spend down as we move into the next year. You will not want to miss Kubernetes cost control strategies for 2023 on Thursday, October 6th at 1 p.m. Eastern. So that's all I've got for you today, but we do have plenty of upcoming and on-demand programs for you here at Techstrong Learning, so stay tuned.
The Engineering the Change Scholarship Program offers a life-changing opportunity for a winner from an underrepresented community to change their lives by becoming a full-stack software developer.
The background that you might see that it's a weakness, it's a strength in this field because everyone is constantly looking for people that are going to bring new ideas.
It's an intense 12-week course that is not for the timid.
For real, who's mastering this right now? Because I sure am not.
So you guys are badass. Like as a class, you guys are crushing it.
You've got to be dedicated. You've got to be ready to do it. Your life has to be ready for it. Follow us as we go through this cohort's Engineering the Change winner on their journey to becoming full-stack engineers.
Welcome! Say with great power comes great responsibility.
Take it down to three finalists. Toria, I'm going to ask you, who really kind of stood out for you?
The three people that stood out to me the most was Stephanie and another woman named Carly and a man named Donald.
Mitchell, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I agree. Actually, I think those are three great candidates, and I mean, you know very well, right, what it takes to go through this process.
Look, I still love good written and oral skills. I like people who can speak well. I like people who really could write well.
Right.
And I'm going to tell you something. To your point about Stephanie, is it Stephanie Sanchez? Yeah, Stephanie Sanchez. Her essay was one of the best essays I've ever read in the 3 or 4 times we've done this.
Yeah.
Okay.
And bring her into
the golden
finals.
buzzer. Right?
So,
she's in.
The two other people you mentioned, to me, Carly epitomizes why we do this.
Yeah.
She said something like, her brothers could do it, why couldn't she? Mm-hmm. Right? Wasn't that in the essay?
Yeah, that's something that stuck with me, especially as a woman.
Yeah.
Because I think that for her, she was like, if they can do it, and there's not enough women in tech, like she was like, I can do it too, and I love that.
I say send Carly to Hollywood.
Golden buzzer?
Yeah. Donald Bazell, really nice guy. What I liked about his essay is his genuineness. Is that a word?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
like being
He's
genuine.
genuine.
Yeah.
Right? You got it from him. My only caveat on this is he really doesn't have any tech experience.
Yeah.
So if it's your vote and Mitchell, you don't object, I say let's give Donald the last ticket to Hollywood. And those are our three finalists for Engineering the Change. Let's bring them in for interviews and pick our winner.
Okay.
Sounds fun.
Sounds
All
good.
right. We'll see you on the next show.
This is Techstrong TV.
Well, it's a great pleasure being joined by Vladi Sandler, and Vladi is CEO and founder of Lightspin. Welcome.
Hey, how you doing? Thank you for inviting.
You bet. Of course, glad to be talking with you today. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, and also tell us a little bit about Lightspin.
Sure, Vladi Sandler. I'm CEO and the co-founder at Lightspin. I'm 34 years old, just relocated to New York from Israel. So it's a huge excitement for the company and to myself. Lightspin, we are a next generation cloud security technology platform in place. We're a graph-based technology under the category called CNAPP, Cloud Native Application Protection Platform. What is special about Lightspin's technology is main two unique value proposition, which are the ability to prioritize and remediate any kind of risk that you have today in your cloud environment, from your infrastructure as a service to your Kubernetes, from CI/CD security to runtime in one holistic platform.
Fantastic. Well, as we both move applications and build new applications into cloud native architecture, move into the cloud, there's obviously there's a tendency to bring things that we know, technologies, tools, approaches that we know from a non-cloud native environment into the cloud and into new cloud native applications. I imagine there's some scenarios where that makes sense, but I imagine there's some different ways you have to think about application security in a cloud native world. Tell me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think in general, when you look on the digital transformation process happened nowadays, maybe accelerated thanks to the COVID, right? We see more and more companies moving to the cloud. And when you look on the cloud themselves, you need to split the relationship to two levels. The one layers are the infrastructure themselves, which is our Amazon or Kubernetes. And the second one is the application level, the segmentation of the application level themselves that's running on those infrastructures. Lightspin's uniqueness is coming also, of course, to take care of your infrastructures because the scale and the change is much higher. And the chance for mistakes because of misconfigurations and improper permissions, same, which leads to most of the data breaches. And they've come to the understanding that customers nowadays are more looking for scale and more care about the time to market than before. Now, that's an important point because if you care about time to market, you care about money. Security is a big influencer on time to market. So every time we complete a sprint and do deployment, security come and mention that we have a problem, it's a big issue, right? It's some conflict we find ourselves in relationship between the DevOps and the security or SecOps or DevSecOps people. What we need to understand in our perspective is the shifting left is to take care of problems before the deployment happen or during the deployment happen so you can get better context. That's what actually the posture management about.
So to say some more about how this fits into a DevOps process. I mean, I think one of the things I've been kind of pondering about is probably if you're doing cloud natives, you need to do DevOps. Is it a requirement? Maybe you could try it without it, but I think you're much better off, of course, to be using a process like DevOps. How does that change and influence an application security, an application security platform approach like you're talking about?
So it's a good point. I think that it really depends on the organization and on the design of your cloud environment. We see a lot of times implement different kind of implementation of your CI/CD processes. I think that from one perspective, like in serverless, a lot of time the developer who writing the application, he is the owner of the deployment himself, not only of the application, but also of the infrastructure. In other cases, it's two separate processes in which we can see the deployment. We perform PR, like pull request to our GitHub both for infrastructures and for the code, and the code requires some kind of resource RAS in place. And those processes, those infrastructures, or code building pass through the same CI/CD process. But in both case scenarios, that's why we call it SecOps or security engineers. You see more and more need inside the organization to be an security engineer perspective more than traditional security, because deployment have a lot of effect. So one of the angles that Lightspin come with is the ability to analyze pull requests. So the CISO or the director of security in the organization can get quickly, by every time the developer do pull request, get the full map of the risks this pull request is going to do, which allow them much earlier on the CI/CD process to start a discussion with the developer or the DevOps for fix the problem even before the build or deployment process done.
It's an interesting idea, kind of the pull request, which of course starts everything in the software development side or push into production. That kind of defines at least part of what the environment that you're trying to protect in. Seems like also infrastructure software, right? Infrastructure as code or Terraform or whatever you're using that's sort of a declarative environment that you're pulling into, that potentially can be pulled from the repository as well.
Right. Yes, right. So Lightspin's main goal and focus is the infrastructure as a service layer and the Kubernetes layer, which we can basically define platform as a service layer. On those layers, as I mentioned before, everything done by configuration analysis, configuration and deployment, which require you to do configuration analysis, during which you can analyze for permission configuration issues, over risky permissions or misconfigurations or clear text credentials in place, but also from the application level, one thing that we know to provide customers is the ability for agentless vulnerability management. It's really important point because when you develop on some framework, you always use some binaries or some packages. Those packages also can be vulnerable. From one aspect, if you want to stand in SOC 2 or PCI or anything else, you need to show that you have a vulnerability management process in place, right? Another part of the story, you want to know that you did a right deployment to the cloud. So Lightspin's goal is to give you the context, is the ability to take the different feeds that we know to provide you on your risk posture management, and to provide you with the context that allow you to prioritize and give the focus of where you should start and work on, thanks to the attack path, our unique technology in place.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's say a little bit more about CNAPP, Cloud Native Application Protection Platform. Platform can mean here's something that everything runs on or runs in, kind of a way of protecting it. I mean, it might also mean something you put into containers and libraries that applications use, or perimeter kind of protections. Put some more definition around CNAPP for us.
It's a good point. So I think when we look historically on the cloud security market, the cloud security market started from basically three categories. There was the CASB, which was maybe the first category, even before really was kind of cloud, more perimeter level. There was the CSPM, the Cloud Security Posture Management, solutions like Redlock, Dome9 style, and Cloud Workload Protection, CWPP platform. And what's happened with the years that if in the traditional enterprise security, you buy a bunch of tools, in the cloud, as I mentioned before, everything is part of the same chain, right? You need context, you need the aggregation of different feeds. The customers really quickly start to come to situations that, okay, awesome. I don't want to have one CSPM, one workload protection, and one identity management. I want to have one solution who can provide me all of those. That's what actually generated this capability and vision of platforms called CNAP. And the ability to provide you one platform that will care of all your needs you need today in your cloud security posture.
So kind of a more of a fabric, interconnected. Here's common things that you can use across your environment, from identity management, access control, etc. Whatever parts that may be.
Yes.
Okay, good. So, well, tell me a little bit about sort of the state of this technology in the market. Where are we with people adopting it, and what things need to be created next to increase adoption?
So I think it's really depends on the maturity of the customer. The mature customers who already have some cloud security solution in place are looking for the next generation because they already suffer from pain, especially of noise. And then CNAP is the right category for them. And other kind of customers which are in early stage on their journey to the cloud, a lot of time looking to build fundamentals of the cloud security, which most of the time will be compliance, vulnerability management, and runtime protection. And in this case, solution like Lightspin would provide them the specific package of the platform or specific need they need. It is the CSPM or the workload protection, specifically in this case.
Okay, very good. Well, tell us a little bit more about your approach, Lightspin. What's your offering look like? Is it a SaaS platform? Is it a series of an environment to run in? How do you deliver your products?
Sure. So first of all, we are Lightspin. We are a full multi-tenant, multi-cloud platform. Lightspin, of course, we're SOC 2, but more important than that, we are self-onboarding. You come to my website, click on Start for free, and you can start to use the platform. We split it and built some package which provide full, free, forever capabilities in the platform. In other cases, it's classical model of pay based on what you need. And more than that, we really big in Lightspin's vision, we really believe in community, and we really believe that we should be the most adaptive cloud security solution by any engineer. So we launched a free SaaS tool called Recon Cloud, which allows you to do full reconnaissance to all your cloud assets which exposed to the internet, which is really popular tool in place. And the reason I'm telling all of that is because customer don't need to spend a lot of time on sales calls and demo calls, and not to be bothered. You have a problem, you can go use my platform, see the value, and then discuss if this value worth to pay for that or not.
And is it usually developers? Is it platform engineers, ops folks? Is it security teams? Who's usually the person that you're selling to?
So most of the cases, again, it depends on the size of the organization, but the budget owner will be the CISO, CIO, CTO, VP R&D. It depends on the size. The end user probably will be from the security engineer, SecOps, DevSecOps, or DevOps in the company.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Well, good. So if folks head to your site, it's lightspin.io, correct?
Yes.
And then can they sign up for a free account there or sandbox or something to test your product?
Full free trial, use it, play with it. And as I mentioned before, we launched 2 weeks ago also a free full version of the platform. So
sounds very interesting. Well, good. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate getting to spend some time with you and Vladdy talking about Lightspin. I hope folks will check it out at lightspin.io. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
This is Techstrong TV.
With the great pleasure of being joined by Doug McKee. Doug is Principal Engineering Director of Vulnerability Research with Trellix. Welcome, Doug.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you. We're going to talk about some interesting stuff. Python, of course, always gets my attention. But first, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you and also a little bit about Trellix.
Absolutely. So you've already got the name down. So Doug McKee, and I'm a principal engineer and the director of vulnerability research here at Trellix. My team has basically two main responsibilities. We do 0-day research, which is looking for never discovered before bugs in both software and hardware. And then we also do end-day research, which is mostly what we're talking about today, Mitch, which is vulnerabilities that have been released in the past and how they're currently affecting the industry. And so we focus in those main two areas.
In fact, I think we're going to talk about one that's been around for a little while. So, Python's always a great topic for me. One of my favorite languages to develop in, sort of the Swiss Army knife. I think Perl used to be that way. I think Python's a little bit more our current utility knife. But tell us a little bit about the research you did, what you discovered.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of an interesting story, the way it turns out. As I said, we do a lot of 0-day research as well. And one of my great researchers on my team, Casimir Schultz, was working on a 0-day project. And he stumbled across a vulnerability in the project he was working on. And he brought it to me. He's like, hey, I found this new 0-day. I was like, fantastic. That's what we do, right? But we have this very thorough vetting process when we find something to make sure that it is new, how it affects a product and things like that. And so we started going through that validation and came back a little bit later and said, actually, this is extremely old. It's not new at all. And so that was really interesting for us to see a vulnerability like this in such a big space where we thought that this particular product wouldn't have a vulnerability like this. So we started investigating, how did it get here? Why is it here? Why are we discovering these things? And I've got an OSINT, which stands for Open Source Intelligence expert on my team, Charles McFarland. I kind of tossed it over his way and said, hey, could you just kind of pull this thread a little bit? Like, what do you see if you start researching this? And we were kind of astonished at the results that we found, which is that this CVE, which is a tar, it's in the tar file module of Python, and it allows for a path traversal attack. It's been around since 2007, so it's about 15 years old. So this is not new. We're not claiming we found something new. And we started looking at how prevalent is it in the open source community, because that's what we have access to, right? Like, we can't start looking in the closed source community. And we found that, as you said, Python's one of your favorite languages, Swiss Army knife out there. Well, guess what? The industry thinks the same way. And we found hundreds of thousands of projects online on GitHub that are using the tar file module. But even more disturbing, about 60% of those are vulnerable to this vulnerability. And so this was something that we thought that, wow, if this is that big of an imprint, then we should probably kind of publicize this information and do our part in the industry to try to help secure this type of a supply chain vulnerability.
So oftentimes, and now, was this existing and the CVE was already existing, or did you have to file and create it? It was been around, it just never been identified and filed before?
That's a great question. So CVE numbers are generated the year in which they're filed. So this has a 2007 identifier. So we are not responsible. Trellix did not file for this CVE. Okay. If we would have, it'd have a 2022 identifier.
Great. And just to confirm for folks, we're talking about CVE 2007-4559. So if you don't look it up, follow along. So there's lots of reasons why a vulnerability might not get fixed. Sometimes it's fixed in the software, but people don't update it, right? Sometimes it's there and, it's just not been exploited in a way that it's been a big enough problem that people go about fixing it, even though we might think it is. Or it's, the way you use the software, install the software, it's very difficult to exploit. If you got to that place of being able to traverse the directory, the file path, and get to something and, grab the goods, if you will. But it's really difficult to do because of other factors of how the environment's configured. Do any of those apply here, or has this just been sitting here kind of nascent? Somebody filed it and, on a Friday night after a good, healthy amount of lager, and everybody kind of forgot about it Saturday morning.
Well, those are a lot of good points. And I think there's probably a lot of factors here among those that apply to this situation. I'll start with addressing, is it super difficult to exploit? And that's why we haven't paid attention to it. If you take a look at the research that we've done, we've actually shown it's extremely simple to exploit and to leverage this vulnerability. And that's why we're actually talking about it and trying to bring awareness to it, is because of the simplicity of exploiting it. Now, I will make sure that I'm explicitly clear that it's different how you would exploit this vulnerability in every single project or application. Like it's not a one size fit all. So there are some cases that maybe it is more difficult or not accessible, but there's definitely many applications where it's extremely easy to exploit. And you can see some of those. We've created demo videos to demonstrate that on our website. I believe that's why it hasn't been addressed.
Now, by the way, if they do exploit it, if it is exploited, is it a permissions escalation? Is it execute code? What can be done once somebody exploits it?
That's a great question. So we actually put this in what we call the arbitrary write class of vulnerabilities. It allows an attacker to write anywhere on the file system as a result of this. So that can lead to code execution, right? It doesn't have to. It really depends on the rest of the environment and the rest of the precautions in place. But we do see that this type of arbitrary write to the file system can very often lead to code execution and therefore complete system compromise. But again, I'll preface that by saying it's different for every single instance of this vulnerability. And it would be prudent for vendors and for the open source community to see what applies to them, right? I don't want to overhype something.
Mm-hmm. Great. Now, is there a patch for this, or it hasn't been patched?
So, this was, as I said, released 15 years ago. The Python community took about 7 years to start discussing it on their forums. And they're, like a lot of times in open source communities, there's not always a consensus on the right way to do something, if it's a problem, how it should be fixed, right? So they actually started working on what they called the safe tar module, which would allow developers an option to not have this vulnerability in their code. And that pull request was submitted to the Python project many years ago, but it never got integrated into the main code base. And there's a lot of discussion around, like, is this a desired feature that should be left for certain corner cases that may be needed to be used by developers, or is this actually a problem? And that's everyone's got their own opinion on that. And I also think that it changes over time, right? At the present time, due to the way Python has become so popular and the way that it's integrated as part of the main supply chain into a lot of frameworks and applications, it's a much bigger deal today than it would have been 15 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. There also seems to be a little bit of inconsistency in the Python community about how they handle these type of issues. So something you might be familiar with is a zip file, for example. And of course, Python handles zip files. What's interesting is if you look at the zip file module, they actually handle this issue securely, that they don't have this problem. But in the tar file, there's arguments that the tar file module is an argument that they maybe should leave it as a feature type thing. So there is no official patch from Python. The safe tar module thread was sort of abandoned, if you will. They did put a warning on their website in their documentation stating that this is a security issue if not handled properly. So they basically have transferred the risk to developers. And that's kind of how the community has handled the issue.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure all the deets of it, but it sounds like if you can't gain consensus about how to fix it, and sometimes fixing it has consequences to other things, right? I mean,
absolutely,
file formats or code you've already got, or you got to go back and change a bunch of other things. I don't know.
And I think the other thing to mention here is that if it was fixed today in the Python code, it doesn't necessarily mean it would get propagated to all the applications that are vulnerable, right? Like we have that problem from a patching perspective, no matter what form of patching we're using. So it doesn't instantly fix the problem.
No, not at all. I mean, it may never be fixed in a lot of code that lives out there, right? We can talk about Windows or whatever if we want. Well, not just Windows. All systems have that issue, unless you're forced to upgrade. So let's talk about what's next. What do you do with this? Have you kind of okay, we put it out there. We're trying to build awareness, be good corporate citizens, and report responsibly. As all good vulnerability research should do. What's left to do? Have you done as much as you can, and you got to move on, or you got more that's going to happen?
We're definitely going to keep pushing on issues like this and keep investigating similar issues as well on my team. That's part of our charter, is to move the needle forward in security, right? We always want to better the industry as a whole. And so when we saw this problem, I personally hate raising the flag on an issue and not providing a solution. I don't feel like that always helps, right? And our goal here is to always try to make everything stronger. And so what we've done is we've released a script on our public GitHub which will identify if your source code base is vulnerable to this vulnerability and what we believe is the probability of successful exploitation of the vulnerability. Now, that doesn't fix the problem, but it does provide you a very easy method to quickly discern how are you affected. Because like we see with a lot of supply chain vulnerabilities, sometimes that's the hardest question to answer. Are you affected? How are you affected? Should I care? And that's going to be different in every single situation. So we've provided that to the community. We've actually already seen a great number of people downloading and utilizing that script in the last couple of days. So that's really encouraging to us. But then we don't like to stop there. We want to take things one step further. And of course, we can't do much for a closed source community. But in the open source community, we can help by submitting pull requests to as many of the repositories that we found are vulnerable as possible. So over here in the next several days and weeks to come, Trellix will be submitting pull requests to those projects with a suggested patch to as many as we can to hopefully get integrated and help reduce the attack surface for this vulnerability.
Very good. Does this fit into sort of a broader strategy for you for your products and things in terms of vulnerability scanning and other capabilities that you offer to customers for for the for-profit part of your business?
All of our research always has a place in the larger organization, in the concept of XDR, right? We're trying to make sure that our customers are fed with the most up-to-date vulnerability intelligence and making sure they understand what the threats are and what they need to do. So we are definitely putting this research into our products as well to ensure that there's a product protection in place, that our customers will be able to be alerted if this type of issue is exploited in the future. One of the points you brought up earlier in the conversation is sometimes we don't consider things important based on if it's being exploited in the wild, right? And so I often get asked, and I'll just kind of trump the question by giving you the answer, is this being exploited in the wild currently? And to the best of our knowledge, we don't have any information stating that is being exploited today. But I would like to bring up the point that you can only find what you're looking for. And if this has been in the supply chain for 15 years and security vendors haven't necessarily been aware of it, haven't been able to write the correct detections, or we aren't looking at that type of intelligence, then we really don't have a great pulse on whether it's been exploited. And hopefully by bringing awareness to this, Trellix and other security vendors can help ensure that we are aware if it is an issue and how big of an issue that is.
Well, you're the researcher, I'm not, but some of these issues, vulnerabilities, when the vulnerability itself lets you cover your own tracks, that can also make it extremely difficult to find them.
Absolutely, you're
write
100%
stuff to the
correct
file system.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now we can make it look all nice and clean and proper when it may not be. So, well, thank you so much, Doug. Appreciate you come on. And, if anything new pops up, help us with some awareness. There's a lot of open source, not tell anything you don't know. A lot of open source projects, more every day. And, no one wants to write unsecure code. There's no developers who wake up and say, I'm just feeling kind of ucky today, I'm going to write some bad code. No, we don't do that. So, this is a good part of our ecosystem to help each other, and appreciate your work and research on this.
Absolutely.
Where can folks find out more about Trellix and some of the things that you offer?
Well, of course, like everybody else, we've got our website, and on our website, we've actually published several blogs about this specific topic. If you're interested in the nitty-gritty technical details, my lead researcher, Kaz, has a technical blog that kind of breaks down so you can have a great understanding of how this vulnerability works and what you need to do to protect yourself. As Charles, my OSINT expert, also has broken down how we've gathered our data in case you're curious and want to really dive into the numbers, suggest you review that as well. And of course, as we've mentioned on our publicly facing GitHub page, we have that script that you can download to help ensure that your code base and organization is as protected as possible.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Doug. Doug McKee, who's with Trellix, and thank your research team as well.
Thank you so much, Mitch, for having me on.
You bet.
is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, we're back here at Yala DevOps, rounding out our afternoon of having a lot of interviews, meeting a lot of people in the community. My next guest is Sharon Rubin, and Sharon is with JFrog.
Yeah, I used to be with JFrog.
Oh, you used to be?
I used to be.
Ah, that's right. You're the former. We met last night.
Exactly.
Now it's all coming back to you. Know, it's a terrible thing to get old. It's going to happen to you one day. But Sharon,
it's all in your mind.
I know. Talk to us. Tell us what you do. Give us a little bit about your background.
So I was in JFrog at 2012 for 5 years, and I started. I was the core team who started at Bintray.
Yep.
And after that, I moved on to another company, and right now I'm in Microsoft in CSC team. It's a commercial software engineering.
Yes.
And I'm even having a lightning talk today. Yeah, about about private data, how to be aware of it, how to be careful of private data, specifically PIIs, and make sure that you're doing the right thing with your data.
Yes. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
So to me, there's two issues. The threshold issue is, do you even realize that this data is PII data? So we had a recent, I'll give you a real world example. We went to an event, a conference, about 12 of us from my company. About half of them got sick with COVID at the event. It's a whole nother story. And we wanted to tell the company who had COVID. And they were going to do it. I said, stop. We can't release this data even to our own people.
Yeah.
Right? And everyone, why? Because that's kind of confidential PII kind of data about people's health conditions. And it shouldn't be out on our Slack or out in public.
Or even having someone attend some kind of event. He might not want everyone to know he attended that event.
Or that they were there, exactly.
There are many regulations which came out. Even the latest one, which I'm familiar with, is the GDPR, which really turned tables around to many companies who just figured out that they need to do so many regulations and so many things regarding private data and how to maintain it and how to keep logs and how to keep permissions over the logs, that the people who really need to see it are the ones that actually viewing that data.
Right.
It's very hard, I think, to be in that state of mind and make sure that you don't expose anything outside, and make sure that even talking about a customer or something like that who you work with, sometimes that customer don't want to publicize that he's part of your client here.
Yeah, we run into it all the time. So that's the threshold, is identifying what is confidential data, what is PII data. Then the second piece of it is, okay, now that I've said it is, how do I lock it down? How do I make sure it doesn't inadvertently make its way out? Or forget inadvertently. How do I make sure, it doesn't get broken into easily? What is my responsibility and duty to keep that information?
So there are many ways to keep that information, and it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to achieve a security mechanism, there are many ways to have users with permissions which can view the data. If you're trying to achieve people viewing the data without the PIIs, that's what I'm going to talk about it. PII, by the way, is personally identifiable information. Such as names, addresses, emails, and
date of birth, even.
Yeah, very simple thing that you think, how can I even connect it? Phone numbers. Those things you don't want to expose externally sometimes. And even in logs, which developers read, you cannot show them the PIIs. You need to make sure they're out of there. So what basically Presidio, which is one of the open source that we're working on, does is just take that text and knows very fast, very easily. It has two mechanisms, one to analyze the text and the other one to anonymize the text, and just take that text, analyze it, find the PIIs, and after that, anonymize it.
So when you say anonymize, what really you mean?
So when I say anonymize, I mean that after it found the text, you can decide what to do with it. You can say, okay, I don't want to see it at all, and I'm just putting blank instead. Or I can put some kind of other text instead. It's your decision. Presidio gives you that option to decide what you want to do with it.
You know, because to me, so I've been in security for 25 years before I started all this. To me, this is very analogous to what we were doing in PCI, you know, payment card, credit card numbers.
Yeah.
Right? Before PCI, it wasn't unusual for people to store the credit cards of their customers. And a lot of people had access. I mean, many offices, they would write it down. They had it in a file.
Even today it happens. And even today, when I go into a site as a developer, I know to look for the PCI DSS. And also, I go into the iframe of the credit card to make
sure that they're not storing it.
Yeah.
And there was a big thing in PCI, very similar to what you're saying, that even when developers were using data sets to help develop and do, that they anonymized the PCI data. The credit cards were truncated, or, you know, that was a big thing, right? XXX just last 4 digits.
Yeah.
And in that way, we stopped doing it. But the bigger thing is that we finally got people to stop storing credit cards. There was a lot of, not that, stop storing credit cards unless you have to.
I know people are still doing it.
Absolutely. There's a lot of companies that offer third-party credit card data storage, which kind of absolves you from having it, you know, for PCI purposes.
Yep.
Are we heading there for PII, where maybe people should stop storing it because it's just a problem waiting to happen?
I think it is possible today with the tools out there, but I think most companies don't want to invest the time or the resources for it. But as the regulation goes further,
as it starts to bite.
Exactly. As it starts to bite and people getting fines and paying a lot of money, companies are paying a lot of money for GDPR violations. Then the companies will pay, then the companies will invest the time.
I saw a recent article that GDPR had passed the 100 million fine mark. Like, so there's not any one company, but collectively, there's been $100 million in fines levied for GDPR violations now, that's a lot of money.
It is.
But I do think that's coming. I mean, the problem with PII versus PCI is, look, credit cards, it was a very simple thing to say, what do you need that credit card number for? You're doing reoccurring billing is why you would need it. Other than that, with PII, like you said, a lot of people think it's innocuous, right? It's just
a name, just an email. Yeah.
I want to make sure they're an adult, that they're over 18. That's all. But do you really need that date of birth to do such a thing?
They're missing such an important part, because someone can come and open an account in your name with your data. He's impersonating you. He can steal your identity. He can get credit cards in your name, social security number, for example, and stuff like that. It's very easy to just get a credit card and get you into debt. And companies don't understand the importance of people's privacy and the person who doesn't want to be a part of something which is so open. I want to make sure my privacy is protected. I want to know that if I sign up for a site, not everyone is familiar with it. There was a story, by the way, 7 years ago, I think, about the dating site that was hacked and all the
Ashley Madison.
Exactly.
So that wasn't just a regular dating site. That was a dating site for married people.
Yeah, I know.
And yeah, it got pretty
Heard about
embarrassing. Very embarrassing. But so in my mind, there's two potential solutions. One is education, right? Educating people about why you need to treat this differently, about how if you don't need it, don't keep it. The flip side is kind of automating solutions, right? Like you said, you have solutions that went through and saw PII and anonymized it.
Yeah, you can for example, you can use it as a cron job, as a CI/CD part, as a function. You can really do it very easily to go over your database, your logs, your configurations, and just anonymize whatever you want. The issue with that is I think people like to save data about users because it gives them power.
Right. That is the issue. I think, I'm glad you said it, not me. But that's a big issue, right? I mean, even we see it in my business, right? Because our business is so, beyond doing these kinds of things, right? Our mailing list, where we're doing events or webinars or what have you, and we have companies that want to reach our readers. But it's not enough to reach them because they don't want to reach every reader. They want to reach readers who are in this geography, have this kind of job, work at this kind of company. I don't have to tell you, right?
The entire industry of advertisement is built on that.
Personalization.
Exactly.
And so how do you, I see it at our own company, how do you anonymize PII but still able to offer that kind of targeting?
That's a good question, and this is something that the companies will need to figure out and still stand in the right guidelines of the rules.
I mean, I can only speak for my own company. This is something we battle all the time, right?
Yeah.
Because first of all, people don't like to give you all that information. For every question you add to their ID, a certain amount of people will just leave and not fill it out.
Yep.
Then when you do have that information, it's kind of fungible, right? Because people move around or whatever. I don't know. It's hard.
It is.
It's hard. It's a hard thing. You mentioned this open source program you work at that Microsoft is working with.
So Microsoft has open sources, many, not only one repository, but several. The Presidio one is the one that our group built, CSE built it, and we're maintaining it, doing the maintenance and everything that needs to be done. It's on GitHub, free for everyone. If anyone wants to search for it, it's Presidio.
So Presidio on GitHub repros.
Yeah.
So is it github.com/Presidio or?
/Microsoft/Presidio.
Excellent. Yep. All right. Well, hey, I want to thank you for stopping by.
Thank you so much.
I hope you're enjoying Yala.
Definitely. Amazing.
Good show. All right. We're going to take a break. We'll be back in a little bit here at Yala.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, back here live in Austin for Linux Foundation Open Source Summit. We haven't really spoken about it, but there's a large expo floor up on floor 4. We're on floor 2. Some great companies exhibiting up there, talking to people, joining in the conversation. I wanted to introduce you to a company we haven't covered before on Techstrong, on any of our brands, and that is Layer 5, and I'm here with Lee Calicote from Layer 5. We get that right?
Oh, that's correct. Layer 5, Lee Calicote. Speaking of great companies,
okay,
let's talk about Layer 5.
All right, man. Let's jump in. Well, before we go, what's your position with Layer 5?
Yeah, founder and CEO. So
excellent. You're the right person to talk to then.
Hey, I think so.
All right. So talk to me. What's Layer 5 about?
Yeah, well, we've been around for a couple of years now. Been focused on open source community first. Some of we built a couple of open source projects from scratch. They're cloud native centric. They're actually service mesh centric in nature. There's about 3 of them. 2 of them have recently landed into the CNCF. Actually, now that I think of it, there's an annual review of one of them coming up. To step back for a moment and say, like, layer 5 sort of mission and vision in general is a recognition that, like, the infrastructure is quite capable these days, and we aim to enable service teams to expect more from their infrastructure, to help them extract more value than maybe they recognize that's there.
Okay.
We really think that we've had an initial focus and start toward service mesh as an intelligent layer that you can program and tell it to do various things. We think that there's a lot of untapped power in the network, and that's really important to microservices and lots of requests transiting the network. And so we're here to help people wield that power in a self-service way.
Excellent. So, look, when we look at service mesh, right? So I've been going to KubeCons and everything, before COVID and all, and before COVID, it really seemed like service mesh was where the action was, right? People were using Kubernetes, but now as we layered on security and network and all these services, we needed a way for them to communicate, talk to each other, interact, and that service mesh became the sort of the API hub, if you will, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
Where all that action was taking place. And then we saw several different kind of service mesh, right? Istio, which only recently became part of CNCF, right? It was Google. Was it Linkerd is another one, right?
Yeah.
And you mentioned a couple that your company have.
Yeah, there's, actually, it's kind of interesting. Just within the CNCF, as actually one of the roles that I play is the chair for the technical advisory group for network for the CNCF. And so with Istio's recent donation, or it being donated as a recent project rather, is, if I get the count right, I think that's depends on how you count, but it's either 5 or 6 service meshes just in the CNCF.
Right.
And that excludes service mesh implementations that are outside of the CNCF. And so, yeah.
It's a crowd. Now, one may look at that and say, well, obviously that is not justification, but proof that the service mesh area is a really big area that's very important to people, and it's going to need a good solution. The flip side is the fact that there's so many of them means none of them are doing great right now. They're all kind of works in progress, and we'll have to see what comes out of this.
Yeah, how the adoption,
how they mature, right? It's still relatively immature.
Networking is a deep and wide area that I don't know that I guess I'll commonly say that if you were to reflect on this position that service meshes are in with the number of them that there are, if you were to look at something relevant like container orchestrators, and so Kubernetes is enjoying the most popularity by far. Previously, with a litany of others that I won't prattle off. But
there's a whole bunch of them, right? That the road to perdition is littered with the best of intentions. Yeah. Right, and from Docker on down. And I think we'll eventually we might see something similar happen with service mesh.
Yeah. And I guess I would put it this. Yeah, I think that's totally true. That we could step ourselves outside of the tech industry and just look at soft drinks, and use some other relevant examples.
Right. There are winners and losers in everyone. But here's the other thing. I think, taking a uniquely open source view of this whole thing is when you have, so you're going to have some open source solution, or maybe there'll be 2 or 3 solutions that are really popular, and they'll be the de facto winners, standards that people use. But then you'll have commercial companies that are harnessing those, leveraging those, but that's the way of open source, right? So we all start here, and then commercial companies build on top of it. And is that sort of where Layer 5 wants to be?
Yeah, that's about, it captures it pretty well. well, we were kind of saying these things are kind of deep and complex. They're more capable than some people choose to use or really comprehend. It can be a scary old thing to be running, well, Kubernetes, any of this infrastructure at scale or even not at scale. I know that if I were in the operator's seat, gosh, I might have to just change my shorts as I go to like make a change in
Absolutely.
This traffic's supposed to go there, and
it's crazy what goes, and the amounts. I mean, the kinds of traffic that we see now is just crazy. So, you mentioned another role that you have, though, besides being CEO of Layer 5, and that is chairman of the Technical Advisory Committee for Network for CNCF. So that includes service mesh is a big part of it. What else is a part of that?
Yeah, there are other kind of, the term network gets expanded from there, but kind of, things like core DNS, gRPC, it's going to stretch my, other network-centric projects that I'm drawing a blank on at the moment.
Well, look, don't knock yourself down. Yeah. Let's talk DNS. It was just so funny. I actually had I call him a young guy. They're all young to me, but a young researcher here who is the Dan Kaminsky Fellowship winner. And of course, Dan is the guy who discovered the huge DNS vulnerability that kind of broke the internet, right? And as a result of that, DNS as a thing became real, right? People started, hey, we better make sure our DNS is tight, right? Locked down, secure, scalable. What's going on in the world of CNCF around DNS?
Yeah, there's Core DNS as a project specifically has become in the earlier days of Kubernetes. There was a different DNS implementation. Core DNS has been sort of a cloud native implementation from scratch and become the de facto DNS offering within at least your vanilla distributions of Kubernetes. There's been, it's to your point, like DNS is a wonderful, makes for a wonderful attack vector for getting into organizations, being able to slip in the middle, kind of redirect some of that traffic without people knowing. And it's one of the older, like TCP, or like a lot of what the internet is comprised of. DNS is one of your older.
We inherited.
And like a lot of the infrastructure that we keep around, it needs to continue to evolve with a real security-centric perspective.
Absolutely.
We end up within the CNCF tag network. There are a couple of working groups within it. The one that's the most active is the service mesh working group. So back to your point about the buzziness of that topic. And tends to be the one that I focused the most on.
Yeah, no, I think it's the one getting the most oxygen, that's for sure. You know what we didn't tell people? Layer 5, where can they go on the web to find out?
Layer5.io.
Well, LAYER, number 5?
Number 5.
.io.
With a hint toward the OSI model, I guess, is the layers 1 through 7. So
we know, yeah. Our audience is real familiar with them. Absolutely. So you're all about Layer 5. Anyway, hey, man, we got more people lined up here. I want to thank you for coming up. Good luck with Layer 5. Keep up the great work, though, on the TAC, because that's the kind of behind-the-scenes work that makes this whole thing go.
I appreciate that.
All righty.
Thank you, Alan.
Check out layer5.io. Lee Calicut here. We're live in Austin. We'll be right back with another interview.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
Hi again, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode of Techstrong TV. We had some amazing interviews with industry professionals to give you the inside scoop. And alongside our airing of the SRE show and Engineering the Change, we had some fantastic content today. We'll be back again tomorrow, so we hope to see you then. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. As always, stay strong. Techstrong.